ICE Theaters, the market's most immersive and high-end premium format. Because the light shall be treated like sound coming from everywhere. Discover the ICE Theaters experience and embark on an immersive odyssey beyond reality. ICE Theaters. Meet us at CineEurope, booth 107.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Rebecca Pahle, Deputy Editor at Boxoffice Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition, and we have a jam-packed episode for you here, the second in our 3-episode CineEurope series sponsored by ICE Theaters and Christie. First off, we are going to have a breakdown of the box office of this past weekend and the upcoming weekend, followed by a visit from Russ Fischer, who is now in Barcelona at CineEurope. We'll be hearing from him about how the show is progressing, and we'll be hearing from him speaking with ICE Theaters about their immersive cinema format. Then after that, we will have our feature interview with Asger of Nordisk Cinemas, this year's International Exhibitor of the Year at CineEurope. But starting off, Shawn, how you doing this weekend?
Not too bad.
We were just talking before we started recording about how maybe some studio executives of some studios aren't feeling so well after this past weekend that we had. We had a lot of films underperform.
Yeah, this was one of those weekends where there was actually good news kind of buried in the headlines, but the headlines themselves were, of course, not so great. So it'll be interesting to talk about a little bit.
The major bit of film scheduling news over this past weekend was a whole boatload of schedule changes from Disney. You can check boxofficepro.com to see a complete list of all the films that have been affected by this bit of release date changes. But the short version of it is that the MCU films and the Avatar films basically are getting pushed back. We're seeing actually Deadpool 3 come forward a little bit. The MCU, we kind of have a domino effect of Avengers Secret Wars was going to come out in 26. Now it's coming out in 27. And of course, the Avatar sequels have been pushed back. I think maybe everyone was kind of expecting that they would after the 13-year delay between 1 and 2. But now we have Avatar 3 that was originally going to come out in 2024, coming out in 2025. Avatar 4 is coming out in 2029. And for Avatar 5, we'll have to wait until 2031. If not later, if there's not another release date change, which I would not be surprised by, but I say give James Cameron all the time he needs.
Definitely makes sense to let him do what he wants right now, considering what Way of Water just did a few months ago.
Shawn, let's just kind of do a quick rundown of this past weekend at the box office, because it's not good. We don't want to belabor the points here, but The Flash came in domestically with 55.1 million, which was below even the lowest end. I mean, you thought like 70 to 60 million, below even that. And then Elemental from Pixar, 29.5 million, second place. It was looking for a while there like it might come in behind Spider-Verse's third weekend, and it was probably way too close for comfort for Disney executives there.
Yeah, that's very true. I think with Elemental, of course, with the holiday in play, maybe the actuals when they come out give it a few more dollars to get it over that 30 million mark. But you're right, it was very interesting that it was going to be that close with Spider-Verse. I think Elemental grossing what it did is not as much of a surprise as maybe other things that happened, but Spider-Verse countering that had just such a great, retention from last week's business, despite the fact that The Flash opened and went after that male audience, which of course is a lot to break down that we'll have to condense here.
Yeah. Well, what's the short version of what happened this weekend for The Flash?
So we even kind of alluded to it. I think last week we were talking about Ezra Miller. We were talking about the state of the DC franchise. Unfortunately, like when we break down these pros and cons, sometimes the pros outweigh the cons. In this case, it really seemed like not many of the pros worked, and this was just kind of entirely lopsided to whatever could go wrong went wrong for The Flash. Honestly, like for months we heard about all of this positive buzz for the film, and critics were, generally positive toward it, but that really kind of came to a halt over the last few weeks. Marketing really got to a point where it wasn't selling the movie to anybody but diehard fans. And that was a red flag, because this was a movie that needed those general audiences. And I think just that general state of confusion about where the DC movies are going played into that. Obviously, the Ezra Miller factor has to be considered. Just a lot of things that, and I think in general, people are more selective about what comic book movies they're going to spend their money on because it's not a novelty anymore. We've already had 3 big ones this summer, 2 of which are doing very well and have had strong word of mouth. So that really just worked against The Flash, despite everything else it seemed like it had in its favor. I really think for years this looked like $100 million potential opener, even in long range forecasting. That's where we started out at it. And it was tracking that way for a while until, like I said, everything just hit a wall about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
One of the statistic that really jumps out at me here for the opening weekend domestically, 70% of the audience was over 25. Like, this could not get younger audiences in.
Yeah, and that was honestly probably chalk that up to Michael Keaton. I think that was where the bulk of the interest in this movie ended up being for older Batman and DC fans, similar to maybe how people showed up for Han Solo for Star Wars or you can think of plenty of examples now, and maybe Hugh Jackman and X-Men, but all of those other franchises had so many other attractive options for young audiences. This really just didn't appeal to many people outside of that demographic.
So you mentioned, people can be much more selective nowadays, especially when it comes to superhero movies, because there are so many of them. We have 2 more this year for the DCEU Extended Universe. We have Blue Beetle at the end of the summer, which introduces a superhero who's never been seen on the big screen before. And then in the latter part of the year, I believe it's November, we have the Aquaman sequel, The Lost Kingdom. What are you thinking? Is there going to be an impact on this?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I feel like each movie has to be taken on its own merits. There, maybe Aquaman 2 has a little bit of a cushion because people still love Jason Momoa in that role. That being said, it will have been 5 years since that first movie, similar to how it was 5 years, 4 years between Shazam movies and 5 or 6 years since Justice League to The Flash. That's a big gap. And, we've seen now that these DC films don't really have any traction in terms of the Snyderverse and the DCEU. That's coming to an end. The Flash essentially is meant to be the stopping point, yet we're still going to have Aquaman. So that's a little bit of a confusing aspect. I think Blue Beetle is really interesting because James Gunn has publicly come out and said now on Twitter that is the first character in the DCU that he is overseeing.
Okay.
So Blue Beetle is in limbo here in between The Flash and Aquaman in a couple of years before Gunn really gets going with Superman. So
this is such a confusing
it really is.
setup. And moving on here, because we do have a lot to touch on in this episode, Elemental, the second worst Pixar opening. Pixar really needed a good weekend. They needed to bounce back. They did not get it.
No, and I would say this one was probably a little bit less surprising than The Flash, but that doesn't necessarily make it great news just because it was kind of expected to be an underperformer by Pixar levels. And, we really kind of talked about this last week too. I think there's a changing of the guard in terms of current generation of kids are more familiar with Illumination and now Sony Animation through Spider-Man. DreamWorks is having a little bit of a renaissance with Puss in Boots. Pixar is not going anywhere, but I do think this is just one of the consequences of not just the streaming strategy during the pandemic, but in general, Pixar relied on franchises throughout the last decade for the most part, with only a few original films here and there. So it's going to be about new current leadership getting back to the fundamentals of what made Pixar a big event draw. So, and the good thing is this seems to have relatively positive reviews and reception, and it doesn't have a lot of competition for the rest of the summer. So maybe Elemental can grow legs.
And the third wide release we had over this last weekend, though it only came out in about 1,800 theaters, was from Lionsgate horror comedy The Blackening. Didn't do well, 6 million, 6th place. Given that, I'm looking at The Blackening's performance, R-rated horror comedy, 6 million, didn't do well. Next weekend, we have No Hard Feelings coming out, an R-rated comedy with Jennifer Lawrence. Whether R-rated comedies are going to come back has been a big question. A lot of the studios at CinemaCon this year in their presentations were really hammering home the point, like, no, we have an R-rated comedy.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm optimistic. I do think they can come back and they will come back, but it comes down to being able to really offer something that people don't feel like they can go and watch on streaming right now. And that's really one of the hardest things to do with comedy because there are just so many films like that. But on the flip side, I think maybe once it happens that we'll get that momentum back, because once people remember what it's like to see a comedy in a communal setting like that on a consistent basis, that's what always made those comedies so successful. That just hasn't really had a chance to happen. Like we saw The Lost City do that last year, but it was PG-13, of course. I think No Hard Feelings is an interesting position. It's really the only major release before 4th of July weekend and Indiana Jones. Jennifer Lawrence, had this movie come out 5 or 6 years ago, I think maybe would have had a little more ceiling to it. Now it's a little bit of a question of, did her break from acting maybe diminish some of her box office draw on opening weekend? That might be one thing to look at right now.
There's pretty much no hard feelings at the box office next weekend, and that's about it. So if it starts getting those good reviews, and if it starts getting that positive word of mouth, it could benefit from there not being much else that people want to see.
That's very true. And even just looking at where I think overall the market right now is, this last weekend saw roughly $164 million from all of the movies. That actually beat Father's Day weekend in 2019 by, I want to say, close to 30 million. So that's the good news I think we kind of hinted at the start of the episode, because despite The Flash and Elemental doing what they did, everything else is around it is still contributing to what the result is. A lot of people are going to movies right now. So is there space in the market for No Hard Feelings? I think hopefully, there's certainly not any other movie out there like that right now. It's also possible that these holdovers continue to carry the load until maybe Indiana Jones benefits from The Flash losing its audience and Transformers and Spider-Man being in their late weeks by that point.
The failures of The Flash and Elemental to live up to expectations certainly don't mean anything, general or wide-ranging about the health of the movie theater industry. Maybe something
Absolutely.
About the health of the superhero movie genre. And I'm seeing people kind of chatter about, like, is the bubble about to burst there? Is there superhero fatigue? That's a separate thing. And we'll be keeping an eye on that one over the next few months as more of them keep coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we won't really have until Blue Beetle. Next July will be kind of packed with some of those movies that everybody's been talking about, saying they want to see more of: Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer, Barbie. So there will be a break from the superheroes for a little while, and that's really going to be the chance for those types of films to shine.
All right. And before I let you go, Shawn, back in, I believe it was early May, your opening weekend range for No Hard Feelings was around 13 to 22 million. You still feeling good about that?
Lowered the ceiling on that a little bit. I think 20 million would be asking a lot at this point. I don't think marketing has really kicked up into high gear the way usually we would want to see for a comedy. Although that's kind of hard to tell because there aren't many samples like that during the post-pandemic. 10 plus million right now feels like a more cautious, kind of safe range. Everything's going to come down to reception and reviews. Comedies kind of live and die on that, especially in this day and age when people can expect to see it on streaming fairly quickly if it's not a hit at the box office.
Shawn, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, Christie, and then we'll be back with Russ Fischer to give us a boots-on-the-ground perspective as to how this year's CineEurope in Barcelona is developing. Be right back. What does it take to create the technology behind cinema magic? If you look at Cannes, BFI, other shows that are considered the best of the best, you'll find Christie in every projection booth. The reason for that is the quality and passion they put into their products. This is cinema equipment built by cinema enthusiasts. It's technology that loves cinema. If you want to know more about how they're advancing the future of cinema or modernizing traditional xenon systems, check them out at CineEurope, MR134, or online at christiedigital.com/cinema. Okay, and now we are back with Russ Fischer, dialing in from Barcelona, CineEurope. Russ, it's your first CineEurope, right? How are you holding up?
It is. I'm great. Thank you. A little bit of drama getting here, but once I got here and was on the ground, which was Monday morning, about 9:30, came straight to the convention center, got into it immediately.
So we're speaking shortly after Unique put out their annual report, kind of breaking down the state of moviegoing across the European territories that they represent. Obviously, a theme through that report, and I imagine through CineEurope, is the recovery of those European territories after the last few years that we've had. What are the conversations that are happening around that subject at CineEurope? Because, we say European recovery. That's a very, very big category.
It's a huge category, and it gets more granular as you go territory by territory. There are certainly some interesting wins in the sense that, places like Turkey, Chechnya, France, we're seeing local cinema be particularly competitive with Hollywood product. Some of that is not exactly new, but the numbers and the balance is different now than it was pre-pandemic. And so that is that kind of feeds into the overall notion, which is that as we go forward, especially as audiences were lost during the pandemic, that exhibitors and studios alike need to kind of recourt and recapture specific segments of the audience, specific demographics. And one of the most effective ways so far is with local cinema, local output. And so it's nice to see that that's working, at least in some territories, really well.
Yeah, looking at the report that Unique put out today, like the top 2 films in Turkey were both local films. I know Turkey has long had like a vibrant local film ecosystem. That's nothing new, but it's definitely neat to see that some of those lessons of the last few years, really reaching out to diverse audiences and making sure you have supply to meet the demand, is still being, it's really being taken in and acted upon.
Yeah, no question. And I think there's a flip side too. And the flip side is that there is an awareness that there are demographics that are not being reached. And, or like occasionally, I know during Universal's presentation today, they highlighted the European success of Ticket to Paradise, especially as it drew in an older demographic that has been slower to come back to the movies. There's been a little bit of discussion here and there of things that play well on TikTok, which is not so much like, we're not making movies for TikTok, but there is the awareness that there's a huge demographic that gets a lot of their entertainment for free, primarily from TikTok or from apps and outlets like that. So how do we get those people, that demographic, either to come back to the movies or maybe in some circumstances to really be coming to the movies for the first time?
Now, at CinemaCon, one of the main takeaways that I had is that after a few years of, let's say, tense relationships between studios and exhibitors, I've got the sense that exhibitors were finally feeling like, okay, the studios have come around. We've had these conversations on windows. We've had these conversations on theatrical exclusivity. Everybody's on the same page now that we need a theatrical exclusive window. So now, okay, we're kind of back on the same side a little bit more. There was not quite the tension that there had been in the other post-pandemic CinemaCons. I know in Europe it's going to be complicated because the studios may have like different deals and different setups and different relationships from country to country. On a macro level, can you give us a sense of how that relationship kind of feels to you this year?
I get the sense that tension persists. It's definitely still there a little bit. I think everybody wants to be playing the same game, and I think everybody wants to believe that both sides of that equation can work together going forward. But you can definitely sense that everybody's still a little suspicious, mostly on the exhibitor side. I think that some of that comes to the demographic question. Like exhibitors, I think, are looking for both product and marketing support that is going to help pull a wider array of audiences into theaters. But then I think also, like during the Universal presentation today, the marketing exec that led the announcement of Trolls Band Together simply said something along the lines of, did not mention it by name even, but he was like, after an unusual detour, Trolls is back on the big screen. And it's like, okay, that's a cheeky way to kind of sidestep a huge conversation that clearly doesn't have a point in this presentation or doesn't have a place in this presentation, but is something that nobody has forgotten.
Yeah, like if they were the first studio, they were like really out the gate that really set that precedent with Trolls World Tour.
That Trolls World Tour day and date change, that was a big deal. That was really one of the big tipping points. So yeah. And so to address it in that way was a little bit like, I don't know, maybe there would have been a better way to do that. Clearly they don't want to devote a bunch of time to it in that presentation, but I took notice. I would imagine a lot of other people took notice as well. The other thing that has not been very much a part of the conversation, in part because we're in Europe rather than the United States, is the writers' strike and the threat of potential strikes by other guilds. But certainly, I think there is an awareness that those strikes represent a potential disruption of a supply pipeline, to boil it down to the most simple terms. And again, the studios are not going to talk about that because of the side of the coin that they're on in that relationship. And exhibitors don't seem to be openly, certainly not in the public forums, aren't really pressing that issue. I'm hoping as the week goes on, I might be able to talk to some more people to really see what their concerns are. But I don't think I'm imagining to say that that is in the air here and that there's, caution.
Russ will be catching back up with you after the show, after you're back here in the States, to kind of go over the second half of CineEurope and your impressions, kind of overall macro level from the whole show. Before we let you go to, hit the trade show floor, go party in Barcelona, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up? Any major impressions from your first couple days?
Yeah, it's, in a way, it's almost like the 1950s all over again, where movies are facing a renewed battle with television. I think the pandemic certainly brought home the fact that people have a lot of entertainment options at home, more than they know what to do with in a lot of ways. And here you're seeing a recognition that some of those demographics and audiences that haven't come back to the theater yet, and maybe even some of those who have, but might, we might like to see in greater numbers, that there's competition from television at home. And so there's a lot of emphasis on everything from, premium large format to seating, in the way that it's like, what can be done to offer an experience in a theater that people simply cannot have at home. And I think that that contributes to a lot of different things we're seeing in the industry, but certainly that's one of the big levels of awareness that's going on here, is just, we need to get people off the couch, but people like being on the couch. So how do we do that? And it's a big topic.
Thanks so much for those insights, Russ. You will be back on the podcast next week to go over CineEurope as a whole. But right now, let's take a quick break, and then we will cut to your interview with one of the sponsors of the CineEurope series of the Box Office Podcast, ICE Theaters.
Hello, Russ Fischer here at CineEurope 2023 with Guillaume Desmazures, the Managing Director of ICE Theaters. Guillaume, thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure.
How has the show been so far for you?
It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's every time and every year I say that, but this CineEurope is even better than the past one. Of course, the industry recovery is there. We all see that. And I'm very, very proud and thrilled because yesterday we did the keynote before Sony Pictures. And this is when I announced the opening of 3 new territories. But also today, first day of the trade show, we already have like 15 new projects that we need to work. 15 projects in a few hours. That's never seen before. So it feels like we finally reached a moment where actually we're legitimate enough and people are asking about us, which is great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I was going to ask if you've been meeting with exhibitor partners or with studio partners, new partners.
All of them. All of them. And actually we, as you can see, our meetings are back to back and we try to address as many partners as we can, but of course we're meeting all the studios individually, and we're meeting as much exhibitors that we can, taking into account that we are a really big team right now on the show, so we have quite a lot of people, and so far we can address everyone. So
terrific.
It's good.
Many of our listeners are familiar with ICE. Some are not. For those who are not, can you describe ICE Theaters?
Sure. ICE Theater, it's like, we're French, right? And we like cooking in France. So ICE Theater, it's exactly when you do a nice recipe, you take the best ingredients. So what we did is we took the best ingredients in image with 4K laser projector, the best ingredients for sound with immersive sound from Dolby Atmos. We want the best seats, back recliner or full recliner. On top of that, we add LED panels on the side to replicate the peripheral vision. And so when we do a movie in ICE, the content on the side walls is from start to finish. So it literally immerses the audience more deeper into the content. So a scary scene will be much scarier in ICE Immersive. A laughing scene will make you laugh out loud. A sad scene will make you cry harder. And that's why we have so many content. In 2023 alone, so this year alone, we're releasing more than 40 titles in ICE Immersive. So if you do an average, it's 1 movie every 9 days, which is quite impressive. And the reason behind that impressive number of content is because we do not distract the audience from the main frame. When you look on the side, it's only blurry image, movement, colors, but it only makes sense when you look on the center screen. And this is where all of a sudden, the center screen aligned with the LED panels on the side, and it's very flashy enough for the young audience to be attracted to this format, and it's classy enough to retain your senior audience.
So along those lines, for an ICE auditorium, you have extra panels. Can you discuss how you work with exhibitors?
Sure. It's very easy. Actually, when we have a partner that is interested in our solution, we ask of them the blueprints in AutoCAD files. From there, we do the integration, and it's the full integration, so electricity, carpentry, design, general design. And at this moment, we schedule the retro planning, and we usually tend to open with a nice premiere opening with a movie. So for instance, we're going to open in Estonia with Apollo Kino with Dune on November 3rd. We're going to open in South America with Aquaman on December 15th. So we always try to find a nice title to kick off the ICE theater format in the country.
Are there specific technical requirements like auditorium size, capacity,
Yes.
anything else?
Yes. So, I mean, most of the auditoriums are convertible to ICE theater, but we tend to do a specific size, which would be between 100 and 250 seats. And the shape of the auditorium also matters. We'd rather have a long auditorium than an extra wide auditorium to keep the panels and the immersive effect close to the audience.
Now, you have a significant global footprint right now. Can you describe it briefly?
Yeah. So I did that joke yesterday at the keynote, but we address most of the time zone at the moment, hence the dark circles under my eyes. But so we're present in the United States, Colombia, Ecuador. We're present in France, Spain, soon Italy and Germany and Estonia. We opened recently in India. We're going to open before the end of December in Thailand with Major Cineplex, the leading exhibitor in Thailand. And we also have a few other deals to be announced very shortly.
Wonderful. Nice.
So total footprint right now is 80 screens worldwide.
Wonderful. Now, along those lines, we've seen a lot of talk already in the first couple of days of the show about global box office recovery in 2023. The numbers are moving in the direction people would like to see. That being the case, are there titles that have performed unusually well for ICE?
Of course. I mean, when you look at Top Gun, it was unexpected to reach those numbers. Avatar was expected, but not that much. And then you have some surprise like Super Mario, which in our format is absolutely incredible, or Spider-Man as well, because you have a lot of colors, a lot of movements, the contrast is pretty intense. And of course, when you have those results combined with our technology, then your box office numbers raise. Just to give you a blunt number, on Avatar, more than 52% of our ticket sales were made in ICE theater. So in France, we have 700 screens, 43 ICE theater, 52% of our ticket sales were made into 43 screens versus 700. So it just to tell you how attractive it is to the audience to pay a pretty nice extra fee to enjoy an immersive experience.
And those ticketing numbers must play into the global expansion that you're talking about.
Of course.
Now, you have content partnerships with Hollywood studios,
Sure.
with local producers, companies in India. Are there titles you are particularly looking forward to seeing in an ICE theater over the next year or two?
Any title, if you ask the business guy, any title which makes sense in ICE is a title with movement, action, colors. So of course, Bollywood titles makes perfect sense. Animated movie makes perfect sense. Action movies like Mission Impossible is highly expected and anticipated. Barbie is expected as well because it's pink, you know, and that is flashy. But if you ask me personally, as a movie buff that I am, of course, nobody works in this industry if you don't like movies. But me, I can't wait to see Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning.
Very much the same for myself. Absolutely. Now, premium large formats evolve with technology. What can we expect to see from ICE going forward into the next 5 years?
Well, you know, cinema technology is something that needs to evolve, and it's evolving, but it does not evolve as fast as the TV business or something. It's something, when you make an investment to do an ICE theater, it's for the long term, so we cannot refresh as quickly everything. But one glimpse I can give you first is we're going to launch a contest of short content, specially designed for ICE theater. So for each movie in ICE theater, you will have a dedicated piece of content of 1 minute, specially designed for it, to show the audience of the full potential of our technology. But also, we will have some options that we can add to the experience, but I cannot communicate on it now. It will be revealed in a few months by now because we're finalizing the terms. But I can't wait. You'll be the first to know as soon as we are.
All right.
As soon as the ink is dry.
One question I didn't ask earlier, if you could talk about it all, do you produce the screen content for the sides? Is that produced in-house by us?
Correct. So we have in France, we have 3 bunkers facility. We like to call it bunker because it's military secured. Of course, when you receive the content 3 weeks ahead, the worldwide release, you need to make sure that nobody's going to steal that piece of content from you. So we are TPN approved, which is the highest security standard. And from there, we have a team of graphic designer who are, doing all the design, and we have a bank of 192 effects that we can choose from for each scene, depending if we're talking about a dialogue, an action scene, a landscape, face-to-face talk. So this is where we have a very manual and dedicated team that is doing all the effects, second frame per frame.
And 3 weeks is not a lot of turnaround time.
It's not a lot. And when you look at it, 40 titles in a year. So now I start to receive some complaint from the team because they would like to see at some point daylight. So I'll need to address that point too.
You could get there with the expansion.
Thank you.
All right. Guillaume, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Have a great rest of the show.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.
And moving on from my colleague Russ Fischer and his interview on immersive cinema format ICE theaters, we move to the exhibitor side of the conversation, speaking with Asger Flygare Bech-Thomsen of Nordisk Film Cinemas, receiving the International Exhibitor of the Year award this year at CineEurope. Mr. Bech-Thomsen, thanks so much for speaking with us. I know that when you talk about the recovery of the European sector, it's not one size fits all. For Nordisk Cinemas and the territories in which you operate, what has the recovery from the pandemic been like?
Well, actually, we are in 3 territories, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And the pandemic was actually a kind of a learning lab. It was a learning lab for us, but it was also a learning lab for society. And the interesting thing in the Scandinavian territory was that for 3 countries being as similar as we are here in Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, it was handled the pandemic in 3 different ways. And in Denmark, it was actually either you're open or you're completely closed. In Sweden, it actually never closed down. But sometimes the restrictions limited capacity to maybe something like 20%. And Norway was in between. There was a lot of discussion about, especially in Denmark, couldn't we keep open and could we just keep a little open instead of being completely closed? But it was actually, I think that you have to judge what our politicians decided on what happened after COVID. How fast did you recoup? And honestly, I would say that handling the pandemic as a whole for the society was also the same thing for the cinemas. Of course, Denmark recouped very fast. It came from the confidence. The confidence was higher already going through pandemic because either it was closed and then regarded as when it's closed, you can't go. And when it was open, it was regarded as safe. So when we opened after the pandemic, the confidence quickly rose and we actually gained traction very fast. Norway a little slower, and actually Sweden has been way slower than both Norway and Denmark in recovering after COVID. And even though we could say that under COVID, we would like to have been open, then all of us were most focused on what came after COVID and how fast our market recouped. The other thing was also an internal learning lab for our company because we had to learn some new tricks of the trade. And we also found new ways of doing things that actually benefits us today. So actually we have a much healthier business, I would say, after COVID.
You have the government restrictions and you have the numbers surrounding the pandemic and everything, but another huge factor in the recovery process has just been film availability, or unfortunately sometimes the lack thereof. What has that been like for, I'm not sure, was there more of a reliance on local titles? Do people watch the same local titles in all 3 of your markets, or is it very separate?
No, local titles are a big thing in Scandinavia. We are usually between 20 and 30% in market share for local titles for each of the countries. But here again, how you manage COVID actually played in. Because if you are a distributor, would you like to release your movie when capacity is only 50%, even though the cinemas are open, but capacity is limited to 50 or lower? It was actually also here easier for the distributors in Denmark, because when the cinemas were open, they were like nearly completely without restrictions. Of course, would have to wear a mask and everything, but still it was open. And that meant that the distributors could easily release their movies. It's another thing if you have like a situation where you're maybe open, but you're restricted down to 20% of your capacity. Which distributor would like to release the movie in that territory? And that was actually the main problem, was the availability of movies. The interesting thing is that before we very much discussed this industry as completely content driven, what you learn when you only have 20% of the titles and you find out you have 60% of the admissions is that we are also very much demand driven, meaning that people want to go out. If they want to go out, they want to have a cultural experience. If they have to choose between the cultural experiences, well, cinema is very available. It has a lot of times. It's nearly everywhere, and even in small towns, it's available. So I would say that we learned a lot for this learning lab, as I call COVID. And one was that we are probably just as much demand-driven as we're content-driven. And that is, if you have like well covered with titles, all genres and all target groups, you are actually doing quite well, even with much fewer titles than you're used to.
Mm. How is that? Has that changed at all, the way you approach programming, marketing, just general operations, the fact that you have this kind of different mindset of the supply versus demand in the industry?
Yes, it has a little, in the way that we are very aware that we need to have kind of filled out all the boxes for all the genres and all the target groups. For example, when we go into high seasons like vacation periods. We were aware of that before, but there wasn't that limited a supply before. Actually, there was more movies that we could really give attention to before COVID. I mean, the number of titles had gradually increased up until COVID happened. So I would say we've been more aware that we have to cover the genres and the target groups in order actually to harvest the demand that is out there. The larger movies, they will, of course, if you have a larger number of titles, you can, of course, offer each target group or each genre several titles, and that will, of course, increase the number of admissions you can have.
We've been seeing, as part of that whole process of people want to go out, they want to do something, they want to be entertained outside of their home, getting their choice to be cinemas. A lot of theaters have really noticed that like premium formats are really over-indexing compared to pre-pandemic. What are the premium formats that audiences in your markets are really interested in? What's your footprint? Yeah, you tell me a bit about that.
I mean, we see the same thing. The larger formats, they're popular, despite that we take a premium price. It's like a little bit interesting, but the premium price does not stop anyone. If there's a limited supply and one of the movies are in a premium format, it actually sells out very fast. It's the same that in the screens where we still have classic seats and we maybe have one row of recliners, the recliners, they always go first. We operate 4DX. We have a single THX in Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. And then we have our own large premium format called Supreme. And they're usually in our largest screens in the multiplexes, and they actually do very well. The premium price does not scare away any moviegoers. Actually, they go first.
What are your concessions offerings like? Attitudes towards concessions can vary so widely between markets. Like in North America, dine-in theaters have become very popular. In France, not so much. What's the state of concessions in Scandinavia?
I would say we are our infancy here. We are still in the test phase of finding out what flavors the Scandinavian audience like. And I would say pretty much everybody is. There's no one who has fielded a real kitchen with a lot of hot food. And so we're still in our infancy in that. We are trying to find out. But of course, we are looking for the experiences in the United States, where you are definitely ahead of us, and also from what we can gain of experiences from United Kingdom, that is also definitely ahead of us. The interesting thing is that, the first recliner were introduced in Denmark in something like 2015. The audience have taken that to them very fast. And the funny thing is that food has done exactly the same. We are a little behind in terms of those offerings, recliners and food. But I would say there are no surprises in Scandinavia and that. What seems to work in the United States probably would also work in Scandinavia. That is what we have of experience now. We have a number of cinemas, or I would say our portfolio of cinemas, we have 48. None of them were fitted out with kitchen. And now we have like 3 of them fitted out with kitchens. But we're still in infancy and the learning phase about what is the best offerings we can have, what is the price points, how will the audience use these in a Scandinavian setting.
What's your recliner rollout been? If it's been just under 10 years since you started, can you give me like a rough estimate of the percentage of seats that are recliners now for you?
I think we're around 30 to 40 in Denmark. We are only around, I think, 10% in Norway. And the 2 multiplexes we have in Sweden, they are full recliners, both of them.
Yeah, just speaking as a moviegoer, once you sat in the recliner, the nice seat, it's tough to go back.
But it's also a hassle. If you have like a capacity, we have 260 screens, then the limits on financials and so on, and time actually, is actually the biggest limitations, because recliners is a super good investment for cinemas, also in Scandinavia.
You just spoke a few seconds back about looking at, what other global cinemas are doing in terms of concessions and F&B and just other non-cinema things to draw audiences in. You're owned by a company that has fingers in video games and all sorts of different types of media and magazines and books and just you yourself. Nordisk itself is involved in digital signage and distribution and so much, a wide variety of stuff. Does that have any impact on operations or does it provide any benefit or any insight being part of a larger company that is, working in different fields? Is there information or are there things that you're able to pull from there?
From time to time, yes. But I would say that the group Egmont, it's a portfolio of activities. And Egmont, we are a foundation that actually, I would also say that we have a purpose in the foundation, and that is supporting children and young people that comes from families, backgrounds with few resources. That common background is very important, actually, for all of us. So we have like a common baseline. Why are we doing this? And we're doing it to, of course, invest in the companies we already have, the activities we already have, and to give money for those activities supporting children, young persons that come from families with limited resources. But in terms of the business side, yes, we work together when there is a sound and good reason for it. And even in Nordisk Film, where we have production, film distribution, and cinema, we actually operate each leg as an individual. And that is because our production was limited to only produce what I would like to have in my cinemas. They would probably miss out on some talent, and they would probably miss out on opportunities that other production companies would pick up. So our production company must have freedom to compete freely with all other production companies, not being limited by we also have a distribution and a production, a cinema. And especially for me, of course, if I was to put all our movies either produced by us or distributed by us in screen one, I would probably miss out on a couple of very important movies from the larger studios. So we are very aware that each of the companies has its own kind of place in the industry. So we only have discussions about general notes. We compare notes, I would say, on the general things in the industry.
Given just how long Nordisk has been in this industry, is there any room for growth in the Scandinavian markets? Or is your focus more on elevating the theaters you already have by investing in things like recliners and premium formats?
The 3 markets in Scandinavia, they're very mature. I mean, we've been in business for over 100 years. I mean, it's not like, there are green fields all around us. It's like pretty much like the end of a game, of a Monopoly game. There's a house everywhere, kind of. And it's a limited opportunity there is for growth in the markets, but there are possibilities for growth. And the good thing is that we and the competition are still investing. If we're going to develop this industry, we are going to keep on investing, and we definitely are going to keep on investing. We are also switching here and there. We're switching, we have one old, or actually we are switching one here in October, and that is not really, it's like 15-year-old cinema. We are switching to a new one. But that will then renew the capacity. It will be a full recliner, of course, we open up. And it would maybe have a 40X as well. We haven't decided that. So the whole thing here is that the industry needs to keep on investing, because the market in Scandinavia are also a little bit different in how much they have been invested in them. I would say the competition is a bit more tough in Denmark. The capacity has been growing more than admissions also before COVID. And that means it's a tough competition.
And finally, I want to ask you, I know this is too big of a topic just for now, but could you give me maybe just a top level, very broad sense of what sustainability efforts look like at Nordisk?
I would actually first say that the whole sustainability is a big thing in Egmont, our parent group. And so it is also with us. The interesting thing is actually that when we ask our guests to rate different kind of things in our cinemas, how important they are for them. For example, recliners, food and beverage, and so on and everything. And also that we have low footprint. Then actually, I must say, it's in the lower quarter. It ends up in the lower quarter. So it's not directly important when you ask the guests about it and you ask them to rank between the different kind of attributes this cinema has. Where it's very important is our staff. We do biannually, the staff survey where, first of all, our staff or colleagues, they rate us leaders. And they actually also supply a lot of comments to each rating. And that is very helpful. From that, we can see that for our own colleagues, sustainability is very important. So I would actually say we've been interested in this for quite a long time. We have gone from what I would call a phase 1 to a phase 2. In phase 1, we focused very much on doing all the things that would have what we thought would have an impact. And that means, of course, LED, it means automation of ventilation, heating systems. It means we are remotely controlling all our booths, meaning that from 3 operation centers, we control 260-some screens, which means that there are no people in the booths. That's very efficient. They also control heating and ventilation remotely. So they oversee that that the sites are trimmed and the automation is working correctly and so on. So all these basic things, that's phase 1. Phase 2 we have entered in now is actually mapping completely what our footprint is. And we use the greenhouse gas protocol like most Fortune 500 companies. And that is a time-consuming process. It's been organized so the measuring or the calculation of what our carbon footprint is lying with the accounting department. But all the activities that then goes in improving that footprint is distributed around all the countries and all the functional areas. It's also that way that it's mandatory for the management in Nordisk Film Cinemas, for the management group and the level under them, that everybody that has bonus has actually a mandatory target for carbon footprint. So the managers, I myself, and those working with me, they have a target which I think accounts for around 10% of the bonus. They also have, of course, like probably everybody has, mandatory a score for when our employees, they make the biannual survey about how well they feel in the company and how well they score us as a management. So that goes also, I think, for 10% or something like that. I would say one last comment on this. What we actually learned from the mapping and the finding out what our footprint is that when you do the greenhouse gas protocol, it's divided into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is what you in office consume, of energy, what you travel in cars, what you fly in planes. Scope 2 is energy, typically mostly energy you consume, electricity in the cinemas. And Scope 3 is what comes from your value chain. For example, mainly for concessions, but also for refurbishing cinemas. And what we actually found was that we've been focused on Scope 2 and actually improved that. But where we ended was actually realizing that Scope 3, the supply chain, has a larger, much larger footprint. And I actually just it's like 6 times bigger. So actually what we found was that today with the footprint we have from electricity and power, utilities in all our cinemas, well, what comes from the supply chain has a 6 times bigger footprint. And that is an interesting conclusion for us, and that is where we're going to focus with our suppliers to improve that from now on.
Thank you, as always, for listening to this episode of the Box Office Podcast, the second in our 2023 CineEurope series, made possible by our sponsors Ice Theater and Christie. Thank you once again to Ice Theaters and Christie for making this series happen, as well to the Box Office Podcast team, that being Shawn Robbins, Russ Fischer, and Chad Kennerk, as well as the team at Record Edit Podcast. The Box Office Podcast is co-produced by Record Edit Podcast and the Box Office Company in collaboration with Boxoffice Pro. New episodes are out every Thursday. Please tune in next week for the third and final episode in our 2023 CineEurope series. Thank you. Have a great day.